We grew up on this kind of kids' comedy, and somehow we ended up here. That's not random. In the 90s and the 2000s, Nickelodeon built an entire personality around being weird for kids. Slime, sketch shows, way too many foot jokes, and a lot of innuendo that we did not clock at the time. Fast forward a decade, and a bunch of us were on YouTube watching creators who swear up and down that their content isn't for children, while their comment sections are overrun with 13-year-olds. So that's what I want to pick at today. How much did that Nickelodeon era actually warp our idea of what kids' comedy is supposed to look like? Why did some people grow out of that shock humor phase and others doubled down on it, even as their audiences filled up with minors? Are we still running the same playbook right now with newer artists and influencers who mostly have tween fans? I'm not just here to rehash the latest ukulele apology or soft focus podcast interview disaster. There are plenty of YouTube channels that do a way better job at it. I want to zoom out a bit. How did we get from watching the Amanda Show after school to watching Miranda Sings make jokes about daddy saddles and sketchy uncles? And what has that done to our boundaries as adults? I'm Andriana, and I overthink the internet because some things are worth the mental energy, so let's talk about it. When you watch this stuff as kids, it just feels random. But when you watch it as an adult, it starts to feel like a pattern. There's a reason so many of us had the same oh no moment with Quiet on Set or with all of the reporting that's come out about that era of Nickelodeon. In the 90s and 2000s, Nickelodeon had a very specific personality. It wasn't just cartoons for kids, it was what if children's television had a sugar rush and then dared you to keep up? You had all that, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Victorious. All of these sketch shows and sitcoms that felt chaotic in a way that was honestly really fun at the time. Bright colors, slime, canned laughter, adults acting ridiculously, kids being intelligent and sassy. To a child, it felt like this little rebellion away from the very clean and very wholesome Disney Channel. You want wild and weird? You go to Nick. And I'm not saying there was nothing good there. A lot of kids genuinely loved these shows. They were funny, they were quotable, they gave us characters that we still reference today. But woven into all of that chaos were these patterns, constant humiliation bits, adults and kids being the punchline because something gross happened to them, LOL random body jokes. And then there's the feet stuff. So much feet stuff. Plus a whole lot of innuendo, creepy uncle style jokes. Haha, that's inappropriate, but we're not gonna say why moments that totally flew over our heads as kids. As children, most of us didn't clock this as red flags. We just thought, wow, this is silly. Or, haha, they said something naughty. And honestly, that's normal. They don't have the context to go, something about this power dynamic between the adults, writers, and the children seems off. We just knew the laugh track is laughing. The characters are all laughing. My friends think it's funny. My parents haven't turned it off. So I guess this must be fine. But then when you go back as an adult, especially now, knowing what we all know, well, now I have a lot of opinions. You watch a sketch and suddenly you're not just seeing, haha, wacky character, you're seeing grown adults wrote this. Grown adults pitched this in a room. Grown adults directed kids and teens to act this out for other kids. And if this is what they thought was fine for kids.
I get to write all the scripts with some very talented writers, but I get to I can put them in any horrible predicament I choose.
What did that quietly teach us about where the line is? Because if your childhood media constantly treats humiliation as comedy and treats kids as props and jokes that are just a little too adult, that doesn't instantly turn you into a bad person, but it does blur your internal sense of, okay, what is normal here? What counts as a joke? When should an adult not be doing a bit like this with a child? What happens when this style of humor becomes the template and when the kids who grew up on it finally get the camera? Because that's exactly what happened. Those of us who grew up on slimy, boundary blurring, weird for kids TV were the perfect age to become the first generation of YouTube creators and fans. So, what happens when that same energy gets unleashed on a platform with no writer's room, with no standards department, and with a direct access to millions of literal children? Well, that's where we're heading next. If Nickelodeon planted the seed, then YouTube gave it the Wi-Fi password. We didn't just leave this humor behind when we turned the TV off and moved to the internet. It followed us onto this brand new platform where adults and kids were suddenly hanging out inside of the same algorithm. Picture early 2010s YouTube, jump cuts, loud, chaotic energy, the look how quirky I'm being vibe, and a whole lot of it's just a joke, don't be offended racism. You had this wave of creators whose default setting was shock humor, racist impressions, slurs played for laughs, edgy sketches about sex and trauma, and lots of chaotic oversharing. Channels like Shane Dawson, Channels like Shane Dawson, Miranda Sings, PewDiePie, early era Smosh, Onision, Filthy Frank, and even early Jenna Marbles, all very different creators, but orbiting the same sun. If it's shocking, it's funny. And look, I do feel bad putting Jenna, maybe PewDiePie, and Smosh in the same sentence as Onision. Nevertheless, choices were made and there are consequences. But we will get to the growth and the change section later. For now, the point is this: early YouTube felt a lot like Nickelodeon. It felt like adults were finally talking to us the way we talk to our friends. And if you ask most of these creators who their audience was, they'd say, this is not for kids, this is for adults. Meanwhile, their comment sections were full of, quote, I'm 11 and I'm watching this at 2 a.m. I'm not implying these creators were like plotting in some boardroom, how can we target 9-year-olds? I'm saying kids were clearly there. It was obvious. And the content didn't change. Also, what adult would find most of this humor funny? If your joke only lands for middle schoolers, maybe the joke wasn't as grown up as you thought it was. Anyways, you have adults joking about sex, bodies, and trauma in spaces where minors make up a huge chunk of the audience. You have racist caricatures and blackface bits brushed off as just jokes, while millions of young viewers absorb that as normal. You have creators talking about the intimate details of their marriages, their mental health, and their darkest secrets directly to teen fans who are treated like peers instead of the children that they actually were. And then you have cases like Onision, pulling teen girls into videos, rating their bodies, blurring the line between fan and potential partner, leading to a long list of very serious allegations. At this point, it's like, hello, it's the Nickelodeon dynamic all over again. There are no adults saying, hey, maybe don't. It's just one creator with a camera and millions of literal children on the other side of the screen. Pair that with an algorithm that rewards you for pushing it just a little further every time. Yikes. I'm not here to walk you through every allegation, every DM thread from 2013. What I care about is the template that keeps getting rewarded. Shock humor that blurs boundaries, a fan base that skews very young, only now the creator is insisting that this isn't made for kids, while absolutely benefiting from kid attention. It's like an even bigger monster now. That combination creates a power imbalance you cannot fix with a soft, focused interview on a former child star's podcast, or worse, in an article in Cosmopolitan politely requesting to be uncanceled. We watched the same Nickelodeon era. We watched the same early YouTube chaos. A lot of creators started from the exact same place, including some who have genuinely grown and changed. Hopefully, we think. I don't know. So why did some people, as they aged, look at that shock humor phase and go, yikes, I don't want to be this person anymore? While others kept turning the dial even as the audience got younger and the darks got joker. What? And the jokes got darker. We all went through some degree of an edgy stage. Like, I'm sure some people's edgy stages are not worth writing home about, while some you probably should never talk about because you might still be liable. I don't know. The real question is, who treated it like a phase and who treated it like a business model? Most of us grew up watching the same shows, laughing at the same jokes. We were kids, we didn't know better. That part isn't the scandal. The turning point comes later, when you get old enough to realize the impact of what you made, especially the impact you've made on young viewers. That's where people start to split. Let's talk about a popular case study of someone who seemingly actually did grow. Jenna Marbles had shock humor in her early days too. She had impressions, crass jokes, messy bits. Again, that was the era. It was common then. I'm not saying it wasn't okay then, but it was common then. You came out of childhood with this insane idea of humor. Jenna didn't stop being chaotic. She just grew into a different kind of chaos. She still blended into chairs and turned herself into a disco ball, but the humor wasn't for kids. It wasn't shock for the sake of shock's sake, or overstimulation meant to grab a tween's attention and hold on to it. It was absurd, it was creative and self-aware, the kind of weird that adults find funny because they're adults. She managed to build a whole space that felt safe, playful, and loving, even gentle, regardless of the shenanigans that they got up to. And during the big reckoning, when all the YouTubers were being called out, when she realized that some of her old videos caused harm, she didn't hide behind a PR statement. She didn't point fingers. She didn't rationalize it as different times. She apologized. She took accountability. She took those videos down. And then the part that still stings, she stepped away from YouTube entirely because she didn't want to hurt people anymore. That is someone who looked at a fork in the road and said, I won't keep walking in a direction that did damage. But not everyone made that turn. We don't need another 30-minute takedown of every creator in that era. But the patterns do matter. So let's talk about two of those creators. Colleen Ballinger. With Colleen, you have the ukulele apology song. You have the podcast interview where she minimalized the allegations and laughed off some of the most disturbing claims like they were simple misunderstandings. Instead of documented cases that we've seen with our eyeballs. With her, you also have the insistence that the internet twisted things. instead of grappling with the reality that kids were harmed by the dynamics that she created. Overall, not a lot of evidence of growth. It was reframing. Now, Shane Dawson. Shane has apologized many times repeatedly and then returned to content orbiting the same themes. The same shock humor, the same I've changed, but here's another docuseries of me exploring the edge again storyline. Again, I'm not really talking right now about whether or not someone made something bad. I'm more talking about whether they stopped doing the things once they realized they hurt people. That's the real fork in the road. The question isn't, have you ever done something harmful? It's when you realized that kids were hurt by the things that you made, did you actually change? Or did you just change the way you talk about it? Because acknowledging harm and shifting your content or going as far as stepping away entirely is growth. Explaining harm away, blaming the audience, or minimizing the impact isn't growth, it's spin. And that's where you can see the same Nickelodeon pattern again. When faced with criticism, some adults doubled down on being the misunderstood comedian instead of being the literal adult in the room. And I really wish, that I could say that this was just an early YouTube relic, that we could just say this is a bygone era. You know, we watched it with Nickelodeon, and then we watched it with YouTube, and now we've grown and we've learned and we've moved on. But if you look at who's filling arenas with tween fans right now, who's thriving on shock value, who's blurring boundaries with kids in their audiences today, it's starting to feel familiar, uncomfortably familiar. And that brings us to what's happening right now, because the pipeline didn't close. It just changed platforms. Here's the pattern that we're all learning to know all too well. This pattern didn't die with early YouTube. It didn't disappear when we grew up. It didn't resolve itself once creators got older, wiser, more PR trained, or more brand safe. It just moves. It shapeshifts. It adapts to whatever algorithm rewards it next. And it found a fresh generation of very young viewers to sit front row and spend their parents' money. Look at some of the artists and influencers filling arenas or dominating your For You pages right now. Their fan bases are visibly tween heavy. You look around and you realize half of the room isn't old enough for high school yet. And the content, or the stage banter, or the audience participation, you take one step back and look at it, and you look around at all the literal children in the room, and suddenly you're thinking, why? Why is this what we're doing in front of kids? You can look at the recent somber controversy as like an example of this. You have a performer whose entire aesthetic sits right on the edge, provocative humor, intense parasocial closeness, and shows packed with minors, apparently. Then come allegations of boundary crossing behaviors. These allegations start to surface and everyone goes, wait, why are there so many kids here? And why does this feel so familiar? Well, because the pattern is familiar. It's just in a different costume. Let's look at TikTok, which might be the clearest modern example of how deeply this pipeline has embedded itself into our culture. There's an entire sub-genre now of hot teacher TikTok. Grown adults filming thirst traps inside of their classrooms, bodycon dresses, sultry transitions, captions like, your favorite teacher. And I just want to know who's holding the camera in these videos of them standing in front of their classrooms trying to look all cute. Is it a student? Surely it's not another adult, right? Surely. They're performing a fantasy that is absolutely adult coded. The over-sexualized school teacher, hello? It's giving role play in a room full of kids. And if you open the comments, at least when the trend was starting, now it's just a lot of rage, but when it was starting, there were plenty of middle schoolers, 11-year-olds, actual students saying things like, I wish you were my teacher. Ugh. They seem to have no shame, no filter, no awareness that this entire dynamic is wildly inappropriate because the adults making the content are blurring the line first. And just to be clear on my stance here, this is not about policing women's bodies. I hate that shit. Stop it. Adults can dress however they want. The issue is when someone turns a classroom into a stage for sexualized content. Kids can't opt out of that. And teachers hold power over them. The problem isn't the outfit, it's the boundary. And then sometimes the line isn't just crossed, it disappears entirely. Like the substitute teacher who went viral after filming her real life students on TikTok, showing students' faces and then making that weird comment about the one student. She was fired, obviously, but that wasn't some bizarre outlier. It was just the most explicit version of a pattern we already recognize. Because it's the same pattern over and over again. A boundary pushing adult persona, kids who feel excited to be in on it, and adults shrugging like, relax, it's just a joke. You're out of touch. You don't get it. It's not that serious. Kids grow up really fast today. It's the same defensive script, and we've heard it since the Nickelodeon era. The same script ran on early YouTube. But I think the part that matters is that this isn't about one influencer or one creator or one artist. It's not even about who's good or bad. It's about the fact that our entire generation grew up watching blurred boundaries treated as normal entertainment. So now we're adults and we're watching a whole new group of kids getting pulled into that same blurred dynamic that we were taught not to question. And that leads to the real question, which is, what do we do with that? Like, practically. So once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, but you can decide what to do next. It's weird, right? Like, it is weird. Realizing that your childhood comfort shows weren't harmless, that the stuff that you watched as a kid wasn't just quirky. A lot of it was harming like other kids in person, and it in general was shaping your idea of what's normal. Now that doesn't mean your whole childhood is ruined. It just means you have more information now, and when you know better, you get to live differently. So here's what we can actually do with all of this. We start paying attention to what we co-sign with our clicks, our money, and our watch time. The fact that some of these problematic creators still get views is boggling to me. What are we doing? If you must see the train wreck, find a commentary channel that you like that covers it. Give them the view and watch a summarized version of it through their perspective so that it's transformational, of course. You can get more honest about what feels off when kids are in the room. The amount of times we just swindled our parents into just giving us the remote back, letting us go back to whatever the show was, and that they just gave in. We can be stronger, and we can stop gaslighting ourselves out of our own instincts. That little internal, this feels gross alarm that we all learned to override because everyone around us was laughing. That instinct matters. It's a boundary, and boundaries are allowed to exist. If the Nickelodeon-to-YouTube pipeline was all about blurring boundaries, then maybe our job as the generation who lived through it is to be the people who draw them again, clearly, calmly, without shame, because the next generation is watching us now. And this is where I will gently shift lanes for a second. If this stirred something up, if it left you thinking about your own childhood or your own boundaries, or just the amount of noise that you've been carrying around, I write a weekly little thing called You Needed This. The channel is for the breakdown, the commentary, the overthinking. The newsletter is slower. It's where we breathe. It's where we practice building tiny rhythms of rest and reflection so that self-care has room to become a habit and not an afterthought. And when you join, I'll send you my 3-day rest reset. It's 3 tiny habits that help you calm your nervous system, clear your brain, and actually start to feel like a person again. It's quick, it's super gentle, and people are shocked by how different they feel in just 3 days. So if you want that, it's all obviously free and it's all linked down below. If you enjoyed this video, or if you just want to see where this little channel goes next, feel free to subscribe. At the time of filming, I actually just hit 50 subscribers, which is both adorable and very exciting. So if you want to help me reach the next milestone, I would love to have you here. We grew up on this kind of kids comedy, but where we go from here isn't random. We get to choose the next script. But in the meantime, why don't you do something kind for yourself? Like, why don't you go have a nap? You deserve it.